Recording in progress.
Okay, let me. And let's say we start seated. So just something that feels comfy, something that feels like you can settle into it. And that is supportive of your, of your breath. Something that allows you to feel fluidity within the breath cycle. And think about those exhales as opportunities to land. Like the end of the exhale is just this release and grounding. We'll take we'll take about 90 more seconds here. Good long opportunity to ground here this evening. Last 10 seconds here. And with the next exhale, let's let our chin come down to our sternum. And try to get here to where you can really relax and let the head just hang. And then we're going to inhale, lift the chin towards the ceiling. And we're trying to tilt the head back here in a way, again, where we can just let the head hang. Like we're not using a lot of musculature to hold, but the back of the head is resting on the back of the torso. And then head will come back to neutral. Hands probably planted or rotated down would be ideal here. We're going to turn over towards the right. So you do so, you can pull that left shoulder back. And then back to neutral. And we'll turn over towards the left. Same thing. Pulling that right shoulder back so we get nice and open there. And we'll come back to neutral and transition to hands and knees tabletop. If you would like to use that blanket, you're welcome to on the knees here. And finding our tabletop, we're going to sway our hips over to the right and just see if you can feel into that outer edge of the hip capsule. And then we'll sway the hips over to the left. And just a big kind of rotational, rotation is probably the wrong word, a little pressure towards that lateral edge. And we'll come back to neutral. And now we're going to push the hips to the right. And as we do so, we're going to pull the left shoulder back and really take our head all the way over towards the left. So we get some compression here on that lateral chain on the left side and some expansion on the right side. And then we'll come back to neutral. And we're going to do the same thing on the second side. So we're going with the hips to the left, and that right shoulder pulls back. As the right shoulder pulls back, we get that little compression on that right side and expansion on the left. And then let's move fluidly through these two shapes. So hips to the right, left shoulder back, and then hips to the left, right shoulder back. And we'll just move a little bit dynamically here. So a different way to warm up the spine with this lateral movement instead of movement through our flexion and extension. And maybe one more time to each side. But we'll come back to neutral and find that neutral space. And we're going to do some circles now with the hips. So like full expression, hips all the way through. You can start whichever direction feels most appropriate. And you can go as deep as you want in the backside, right? So this could go through child's pose or a child's pose-like kind of transition, and then all the way forward as well. Just really trying to get here the head of the femur to work through the entirety of the hip socket. And then we'll reverse and go the opposite direction. Just playing with creating some space here. Again, with unique movement through this hip capsule. Eventually we'll come back to neutral, curl our toes, lift our seat, and find our way into down dog. Get those heels to drive back into the depth of the shape. Really press in so that you can feel the space you've created in the hips. And then let's walk to the front of the mat. Inhaling to half lift. And exhaling to fold. And as you settle into that fold space, really thinking about the back getting long. Eventually, we're going to drift our awareness to our sacrum and roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. And we'll come into this top space. And from this top space, just think about creating a nice strong mountain pose. Think about that quad flex and that core engagement. And then we're going to fall back or sink back into maybe like 10%-ish chair. So just a hinge at the hips. The lower half of the legs are staying nice and vertical. And then we'll rise right back up, right? So just that adjustment into that anterior lock-in. Sweep the arms up and overhead. And then think about that belt line as you fold over that and into your full forward fold. The bottom of that fold, lumbar expansion. Eventually, we'll plant the hands and walk ourselves back and into down dog. And as we get all the way back into that down dog space, pressurize down into those finger mounds and drive the hips up. And see if you can find that little bit of lumbar length. And then let's come down to hands and knees. We'll flip the tops of the feet and settle our way back into child's pose. Child's pose is really the last shape that we can offer, that we need to offer to get into the hips fully, right? So last little bit of room. This child's pose may feel more sensational in a good or bad way than a traditional child's pose. Because we've done so much of the hip warm up already, we're now burdening the hips with a pretty good ask. Let's give ourselves just about 15 more seconds here. And when you're ready, we're going to pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. From that hands and knees tabletop space, let's curl our toes, lift our seat, find our way back into down dog again. Thinking about expressing the depth here, especially on the back side of the body. Feeling the finger mounds, the fingerprints, and then we'll walk to the front of the mat. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. And let's roll ourselves up once again. So lumbar by lumbar, or vertebrae by vertebrae through the lumbar, eventually to the thoracic, and then to that cervical lift. Coming into our top space, bringing our hands together at heart center. Let's go straight back into lunge. So left foot's going to slide straight back. And we just find a nice expression of lunge here. Sweep the arms, fully express your crescent shape. Keep that back quad nice and active. Take that bend out of the back knee. And then hands will drop to heart center and we'll return to the front of the mat. Big full breath. And we'll do the same thing to the second side. So stepping the right foot back into the depth of the shape, getting that quad engagement, and then sweeping the arms. Really feeling that anterior hip space. And then hands drop to heart center. We return to the front of the mat. Okay. A little bit of potential fatigue here. As we got deep into that anterior hip space, we're going to sink back into chair. There's a tendency here, because we have that fatigue, to really cheat the knees forward. So make sure you go hips back. Make sure you stay with this nice vertical lower leg. And then we'll rise back up. Sweep the arms up and overhead. And we'll exhale through forward fold. Inhale to half lift. Exhale back to fold. Plant your hands, we'll walk to plank. And from plank, we'll lower ourselves to our belly. Keep the hands right where they are. So right underneath the shoulders, flip the tops of the feet, flex the quads. So you have the lower half of the body active, glutes are squeezed. And then we're going to pull the elbows up towards the ceiling. Like you're trying to point those elbows towards the ceiling. And in doing so, as the elbows start to tilt up, you start to feel the top of the scapula tilt down. And that tilt down captures some of that subscapular tissue at the very edge of the top edge of the scapular line. So really think about getting those elbows into that active position here and working across the back of the shoulder girdle. And then we'll relax and slide our hands underneath our forehead for a little crocodile pose. And we'll just breathe a little bit in crocodile pose. Hips getting that relaxation capacity, right? But really that acute sensation across the top of the shoulder girdle is what we're looking to allow to relax the most. Let's give ourselves about 60 seconds to fully relax in here, so the shoulders can find their way into ease. When it feels right for you, as it feels right for you, hands are going to slide back underneath the shoulders. We'll bring some strength under, just above the kneecaps, and we'll press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, Let's curl the toes, lift the seat, find our way back into our down dog expression. Get that length, create that sensation of space. Really think about the depth of the shape here. And we'll walk once again to the front of the mat. And inhaling into half lift. Create the sensation of length across the entirety of the back. Keep that length as you settle back into your fold. And utilize that anterior hip space to create the posterior extension or the posterior expansion. And allow the top of the head to settle and fall and breathe into that space. And then let's drift our awareness to our sacrum. We'll make a choice. We'll roll or sweep our way up so that we end up back into mountain pose. And from mountain, let's sink our seat back into chair. So we go full expression of chair here. And from chair, we're going to slide the left foot straight back into lunge. So you end up by doing this, as long as the step back is at a normal length, we end up in a pretty deep version of lunge. We still have the straight left leg, but we're deep into that right hip. Sweep the arms, fully express the shape, and then ground to the left heel and open up into warrior two. Because we're a little bit deeper, there's a tendency for the torso to tilt forward. Make sure you have that core squeeze and we're staying vertical. And then think about that lateral edge of the right thigh just peeling open. Left heel spins up, we're back into crescent. Hands are going to drop to heart center and we'll return to mountain. And now I have some pretty good asymmetry here. A little glute squeeze to help kind of balance the hips. And once you feel that hip balance, once you're comfortable with the balance, let's sink back into chair. And we'll take this to the second side. So good strong chair, right foot slides back. We find that depth. We really have that left leg super loaded. And the hip flexor is super active. Think about the middle of the shape, fully express, then right heel grounds and we open up into two. Same thing. There's a little bit of a tendency for the torso to tilt forward. Think about keeping those lateral edges nice and vertical. Right heel spins up. We're back into crescent. Hands drop and we return to mountain. Now we have some relative, right? Some balance across the hips. But we also have a little bit of fatigue jelliness there. Let's drop back into another chair. So we go back into that depth, kind of find the edge of the shape. And this time we're going to express fully as the arms extend and get that glute activation. We kind of get past the quads and all the way into the necessity for glute activation. And then we'll rise back up and exhale through forward. Fold. Hips are open. So as you fall into this fold, think about allowing the head to really guide you into depth. Remember that the knees can bend to prevent that hamstring limitation. And then eventually we are going to plant our hands and walk ourselves back into down dog. And then from down dog, we're going to shift forward to plank, glute squeeze, and we lower ourselves to our belly. This time, we're going to slide the hands down towards the glutes, maybe 4 to 6 inches. So from underneath the shoulders, we go kind of the middle of the rib cage. And then we're going to squeeze the elbows back towards the heels, like you're trying to push your elbows towards your heels. And take your forehead and break that from the mat, maybe a 1/2 inch. This puts the burden on the bottom of the subscapular tissue, but it also comes across that thoracic joint. So you may feel some weakness in the middle of the back. Think about using the glutes and the core to help compensate there and really drive those elbows back as you do so. And remember to breathe. And then we relax. We slide the hands underneath the forehead. And we head back into crocodile pose. It's a little bit less shoulder specific as we get down the back there, but we still have the bottom edge of that shoulder girdle. So think about positioning the arms here, right? Hand stack doesn't necessarily have to be the end position, but it can be. But you can still move those elbows. We want to feel the shoulders relax so that the blood flow returns and we get that shoulder strength to come back into play. And we'll give ourselves about 45 more seconds here. So there's this young man, and he's going to see a therapist. He's just, kind of going through some traditional early life struggles, as a high pressure job, and has a lot of stuff going on and financial burdens, and he just doesn't feel like his bright and shiny self. So he's out asking for some help and some guidance to just clear that path and find the way. He's going in for his first session and he's kind of nervous about it. When you're ready, hands are going to slide back underneath the shoulders. We're going to press ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop. And from hands and knees tabletop, let's take our left leg, extend it straight back and behind us. So we get that big hip flex, right? We want that leg to be active enough that we feel the hip flexor. And then we're going to lift up, modified version of down dog, right? So the right leg is barely doing anything. Then step our right foot forward into lunge. And again, we're in a pretty deep shape here, right? Coming into an atypical version of lunge. This time we're going to combine lifting our torso and bringing our left leg into half Karate Kid. So hands are going to come to heart center. We're going to lift up and we're going to find this little balance. Now we still have activity on that hip flexor. We want to keep a roughly 90-degree bend on the left leg. It'd help if I did it on the camera side. And we want to stay vertical. So we're getting that nice core squeeze, finding that strength. And we are going to, from this space, extend our left leg straight out in front of us. There's a couple of things we don't want to do. We don't want to lean super far back. We don't really need to worry about the height of the lift, right? If we can get to parallel with the floor, rad. But instead of compromising the torso, just bring the leg to what the hip has available. And then we're going to slide that left foot straight back and into lunge. Sweep the arms, fully express the crescent shape. As we do this, now we have a huge load or a huge burden on that hip flexor. Sink into the full capacity of the hips here so we get even deeper than we have been. And then we're going to roll back open into a warrior two. You can see as I turn, the ilium and the femur had to lift up. We were so deep into the shape. So settle in, find that space. Ooh, and then slide back into that right hamstring. It's just a little activation here. We're just bringing that posterior chain. We're not even taking the tilt. We're just bringing the posterior chain on the backside of the right leg into the shape. And then we'll rebend and resettle. Spin the left heel up. We're back into crescent. Float the hands down to the mat. Step the right foot back into down dog. And find your symmetry. So pretty significant asymmetry in the hip space here. Find that, come down to hands and knees, flip the tops of the feet, and settle into child's pose. When you're ready, walk those fingers out in front of you. So the fingertips walk out and then come up onto your fingertips and get that big shoulder capsule stretch just by elevating the hands away from the mat. And then we'll plant our hands And pull forward to hands and knees, tables up. Right foot's going to extend straight back and behind you. So we have this whole second side of this sequence. Find that strength in the hip and then roll back into this modified version of down dog. The left leg is barely active at this portion of the shape. Then we slide the left foot forward. Sweep our way up to crescent. Except I cheated. So now we're just going to move. We'll take a hand drop and we'll take that right foot forward into half Karate Kid. So we just broke that part up into two parts. I don't know if that's an easier or harder transition, but we got to try both. So now you know which feels easier or harder for you. Keeping that 90-degree bend at the knee and keeping that core activation, thinking about the vertical spine. Eventually we settle enough that we can extend that right leg out in front of us. And we hold the torso stability as the primary focus. And then we'll slide the right foot straight back. We still have that hip flexor activation, right? So now we're in this super deep version of lunge, and we're going to sweep up and then blossom open into two. Thinking about maintaining that depth, keeping some awareness on that lateral edge. Eventually, we'll slide back just enough to activate the posterior chain. Stay strong on those lateral edges. We come back into traditional warrior two. Spin the right heel up for crescent. Float the hands down on the mat. And we'll step the left foot back and into down dog. Now we have some more symmetry, but we have a ton of space. Space in the back, space in the hips, space in the posterior chain. Keep that as you come down to hands and knees tabletop. And we'll sink back into child's pose. This time you don't have to have the arm activation, but if it felt good to bring that shoulder activation in, feel free to walk those fingertips out and then come up on the fingertips so the palms peel away from the mat. And we just breathe and settle in here. So he's a little bit nervous and he's coming in late and he's a little bit disheveled and he's wearing this kind of like torn up t-shirt and he has on like athletic shorts and he's put them on backwards. And his therapist sees him walking in the room and she knows like pretty quickly, you know, got some anxiety things going on, got some stress things going on, has a little bit of life disheveledness going on. And we'll give ourselves just 20 more seconds here. And when you feel right, when you feel ready, pulling our way forward to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, curling the toes, lifting the seat, finding our way into down dog. And really driving that length across the spine. And I think we'll once again walk our way forward to the front of the mat. So we end up in a fold here. Inhale to half lift. Get that length. Think about pushing the top of the head away from the tailbone and maximizing that middle of the back space. And then exhale your way back into fold. And then eventually we will sweep or roll our way all the way up and into mountain. Hands coming together at heart center. Sink the seat back into chair, tailbone back, not knees forward. Left foot's going to slide back into that deep version of lunge. Ground the left heel, roll open to this deep version of two, slide back into your right hamstring, and we're headed towards triangle. Triangle here with some real depth to the legs. Think about getting the top of the head out and extending away from the hips. Like you're trying to lengthen this lateral chain and pull maybe even some psoas depth into the shape. And then left oblique's going to bring us back up, and we'll blossom back into two. Think about that lateral edge of the right thigh really pulling open. And then left heel spins up. We're back into crescent. Hands drop to heart center as we step to the front of the mat. Settle here. Breathe here. Feel enough counterbalance between the glute and the core so that you're nice and vertical. And then let's sink back into chair. Hips back, not knees forward. Right foot slides straight back. We ground and blossom to two. It's this deep version of this shape. Think about releasing all the way to that back leg. Slide back into the left hamstring. And we're down towards triangle once again. Really thinking about that extension of the top of the head, top of the body, away from this hip joint so that we're feeling and pulling this lateral chain. And then right oblique is pulling us up, sinking into warrior two. Right heel spins up, hands come up. Drop the hands to heart center as you step back to the front of the mat. Let's sink the seat down towards Malasana. And we'll extend our legs out in front of us as we make our way through staff and into a seated forward fold. And so the young man starts kind of talking and sharing his challenges. And his therapist is listening and she's kind of taking some notes, and he just gets talking and talking. He's talking about the stress of his job and how his new home is kind of getting overrun with weeds and how the laundry's piling up, the dishes are piling up. And he gets towards the end of his time. He looks down and he sees that he has the rip in the shirt, and he keeps looking down and he sees that his pants on backwards, and he just turns bright red. And he starts talking about how he needs to, upgrade his wardrobe. We'll give ourselves 45 more seconds here in this fold. A little bit longer fold than we would maybe traditionally do at this point in class. See if you can use all of this hip space that we've created thus far, even maybe thinking about retracting that anterior hip crease to get more depth into the fold, to get more torso lengthening into the fold. And when you're ready, we're going to come back up to vertical and bring the bottoms of the feet together, knees out wide, hands clasping over the toe mound. And torso's going to start going forward. I kind of appreciate a lateral rock to get into this. It just helps me kind of move, but that doesn't necessarily have to be your thing. I also really like to get the elbows in front of the shins because at the edge of my fold or the end of my fold, I can use the elbow leverage to help push and extend the top of the head out away from the tailbone. It helps open up this medial line and it brings some posterior chain expansion deep into that soft tissue supporting the lumbar as well. And we'll give ourselves 30 more seconds here. And when you're ready. Let's bring the spine back to vertical. And we'll release ourselves onto our back. And as we settle onto our back, just take a moment to breathe, to appreciate the work that we've done, let the hips and the spine reintegrate. We'll give ourselves about 60 seconds just to take this in. My favorite moment of the class here, right? It's just all the work settling into this horizontal support and the integration of the spine. And so he's looking down, he's seeing the torn shirt, he's seeing the shorts on backwards, turning bright red, and he says, he looks back up at his new therapist and says, I need to fix this. This is ridiculous. I can't be out in public like this. And their time is at the very, very end. And she looks back at him and she says, why would you be attempting to fix things on the outside with what you can fix within? And he hears this and he listens to this and he goes home and he walks into his house and he walks through the yard, right? It's an utter mess. And he walks into the house and it's an utter mess. And that message from his therapist kind of resonates. Why would I be worried about the exterior of my clothing when I'm living in this chaos? Last 10 seconds here. And we'll heel to our feet out to the width of the mat. And start to sway the knees side to side. So big windshield wiper like knee movements, right? Try to sync the positioning of the angle of each leg. So because we have this offset, the knees are kind of moving in different directions, right? They're certainly not stacking. The top knee ends up kind of pushing down towards the bottom of your while the bottom knee, right, the lateral knee, the outside knee, is more traditional in its rotation. Really think about syncing that movement. So as the bottom thigh makes its way to the mat, the top thigh, the top hip is at its full capacity, whether that is dropping the inner leg down to the floor or not. For most of us, that will not be the case. But we're really just trying to mirror the angle and the range of motion on each side of the lower half of the body. Let's do 2 more times in each direction here. And when you feel completed, we're going to bring our knees back to neutral. So hip width with the heels, with the kneecaps, with the thighs. And let both knees fall over towards the left. This time the top hip, the right hip is coming with. Push that right knee just a little bit further than it would normally go. And then take your left hand on top of that left thigh and give a little encouragement for a little bit of extra pressure there. I like to take the top hand, which is in this case is the right hand, and grab kind of the middle of my shorts and just get a little lift too. That helps me get a full rotation. Sometimes I'll even get a pop out of that. And then we're going to do the same thing to the second side. So knees are traditional hip width. Both knees fall to the right. The left leg goes a little bit further. The left knee goes a little bit further. Right hand to the top. I like that left hand now to the top hand to give that little short lift, but that doesn't have to be the case. And then eventually we'll come back to neutral. Bottoms of the feet are going to come together and the knees are going to fall out wide. So this may be the point when you really, I don't know for the first time or not, but really feel the work that we've done on the hips. There's a lot of mobility here. And that may lead to the sensation of instability or an uncomfortable kind of opening here at the groin or that hip capsule. Remember, you can make fists and just slide the hands underneath the thighs for a little bit of support. We won't be here super duper long, but you have so much space, almost like a crime not to let that settle in a little bit. Last 20 seconds here. And we'll bring our knees back to neutral. Extend the right leg down the mat and pull the left thigh in towards the torso. Hands clasp here, just below the kneecap, kind of at that high shin. I'm really thinking about drawing the lower thigh, which kind of feels like the upper thigh here, but the kneecap side of the thigh, quad, towards the sternum. And really thinking about exaggerating that compression at the hip capsule. And so the next day, This young man, he wakes up and he looks around and everything's chaos and he's unhappy. And he hears that message from the therapist, why work on the outside when you can address this from the inside? And he starts cleaning the house. And it takes him about 2 days, but he gets the house cleaned. And then he looks around the house and it's clean, but it's empty. He's done no decorating. So he starts decorating the house. And it starts to look beautiful and immaculate. And he takes some pictures because he wants to show his therapist his progress. And we'll release that right leg so that it mirrors the left and just feel again the asymmetry, right? We've done so much hip work, and yet there's still room to create space because the left side is so much more open than the right. And then we'll fix that by drawing the right knee in towards the torso, hands clasp on that high shin. And then we're really focusing on bringing this low thigh towards the sternum. And it changes the fulcrum, right? We end up using kind of the middle of the thigh, and the femoral head gets adjusted into a deeper position in the hip socket. Why the intensity is so high in that actual hip capsule, because we are using this leverage to really get in and make this adjustment. And we've created so much space to make the adjustment from. And so for the next couple days, he's just kind of like doing and decorating the house. And it starts to look like really, really beautiful. And he has one more day in between his next therapy appointment. That's 7 day out. When you're ready, right leg's gonna release and mirror. Woo, left. Can we just settle here? Eventually the knees are gonna bend. And we'll start to sway the knees dynamically side to side. Now this is a motion that feels good for you. So there's no goal here, there's no endpoint here. If the movement is a quarter of an inch and that feels good, that is perfect. All we're looking for is enough movement so that the hips just settle back in, so that we get reintegrated at the femoral head. So the upper half and the lower half of the body are playing nicely together once again with all this new space we've created. And eventually, we're going to bring the knees back to stillness. Ask ourselves if there's anything we want, need, desire before Shavasana. If there is, we're going to offer that to ourselves. If there's not, we'll just drift our way into a shape. I'll try to get the strobe light off here. Drift ourselves back into a shape where we can feel that for some stillness, that for some ease. And so it's been 5.5 days. He's trying to get through this 6th day since his therapy appointment, and he's starting to feel worse about life, not better. And he's going through the pictures he's taken of his house on his phone, and he's thinking, it looks so perfect and beautiful. And he's realizing that he's worried about like the placement of objects and the fact that there's a dish rag kind of off center in his picture. And now the pictures he's taken to show off his beautiful house are creating more stress. Finally, on the sixth day, he goes to sleep and he cannot wait for his appointment the next morning. When you're right, when you're ready, just finding your way into a place of stillness. And so he wakes up the next day and he's just anxiety ridden, and he like almost sprints into his second therapy appointment. He sits down and he starts by saying, I listened to what you said. And he looks down at his clothes and he sees that he's kind of upgraded. His shorts are on the correct way and his t-shirt doesn't have a hole in it. He says, I tried to take what you told me last week and implement it into my life. And I didn't work on the things on the outside. I worked on the things on the inside. So I ended up cleaning my house. He takes out these pictures and he's kind of scrolling through the pictures and he's showing her. And she's like kind of observing this and watching. She says, okay, did what you did make you feel better? And he says, no, I feel worse. I feel anxious about the way my home looks. I feel anxious about the clothes, even though I don't have holes in them. I feel anxious about everything that I had spoken to you about last week. It didn't help at all. And we'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. And into our wrists, ankles, elbows and knees, shoulders, hips, all that freedom we've created in the hips, neck, and head. And eventually our whole body will move and we'll utilize that movement to transition from the shapes we are in back into a seat. In the seated space, spine gets tall, breath gets fluid, eyes close. And she looks back at him and she says, okay, well, I want to state this again. Our time is running short once again, but I want to know why you're focused on fixing the things on the outside and not the things on the inside. And this time she puts her hand to her chest as she says inside. And he clicks in a different way with the concept. And he realizes that the house is the outside and the clothes are the outside and the car is the outside and the job is the outside. And with our next inhale, we'll bring our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you ensure that you're working on the things that can be fixed from the inside and see how that impacts your experience with those things on the outside? Thank you so much for being a part of this evening's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Monday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you being here. Hopefully by next week, I'll have my normal setup going again. Life will be good. Have a beautiful rest of your week. I will be back on Sunday. So we'll do this again on Sunday. No class on Monday for Memorial Day, Labor Day, one of those days. A holiday, I'm pretty sure, is next Monday. We won't do next Monday, but we'll do it on Sunday. Love the heck out of you. See you soon. Have a beautiful week. And if I'm wrong about the holidays, just send me a note. Tell me I'm wrong. That's not the first thing. Love you guys.